Former President Trump criticized President Biden for his Israel policy, saying that the president just dumped Israel and said essentially that Bibi Netanyahu should just take a walk. Biden is definitely facing mounting pressure from the left for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The president was recently caught on a hot mic telling Senator Michael Bennet, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg that he told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that they need to have a come to Jesus meeting. And amidst all of this, mainstream media is not helping, publishing unsubstantiated claims telling only one side of the story and painting Palestinians as nothing more than mere pawns in Hamas's strategy. All are unprofessional mistakes Western media makes while covering the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The question is it bias or is it just sheer unprofessionalism? Lee McIntyre, a research fellow at Boston University, warns that when accounts filled with falsehoods mixed with the truth, they pollute the entire information ecosystem, making it harder for everyone to tell fact from fiction. As we delve into this very complex web of politics, power, and perception, it's very clear that the path to justice for Israelis and Palestinians alike is full of moral dilemmas and strategic complexities. With Washington not doing very much to actually end the war, the question now is, how can Biden pressure Israel in the Gaza conflict? Or maybe it's time for a change in U.S. leadership come November. Just stay right there, guys. I mean, even Israelis are protesting to end the war. Check this out.
Separated from their loved ones for 162 days and counting, impatience is now giving way to fury. These Israelis are demanding the government does a deal with Hamas to free the hostages. And they want Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign. They're calling for new elections. In Tel Aviv, they blocked the streets. Police on horseback were brought in to disperse the crowds. Protesters were arrested. Police using water cannons to try to stop the demonstrations from spreading. Every weekend, the families of hostages and thousands of their supporters are taking to the streets.
I think they don't do enough for the hostage, they don't do enough for the war, and we want to change them.
We're here to protest this government that hasn't been acting for the majority of people in Israel for a while now, especially since the beginning of the war.
You know, sometimes, guys, I imagine a day where I turn on the news and I hear there's peace on earth. I would definitely like that, wouldn't you? But instead, we're having to face a whole lot of indifference from the different leaders we have. I mean, even former President Donald Trump has criticized President Biden of his Israel policy. He describes it as all of a sudden he dumped Israel. That's what he's doing. He dumped Israel. He just said essentially that Bibi Netanyahu should take a walk, according to Trump. In the interview, Trump also reacted negatively to comments recently made by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, in which he called for new elections in Israel and said that Netanyahu has lost his way. According to Trump, the Democrats are very bad for Israel. In a recent interview, Biden said that Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, he must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken. And he's hurting Israel more than helping Israel, as it's contrary to what Israel stands for. So Biden thinks it's a big mistake. Now, is this an incredible hypocrisy being spoken? In reality, Biden doesn't actually care. But really, this muddled up perspective of the Israel-Hamas war, it just shows you how messed up mainstream media has been when it comes to covering the truth on the ground. Just take a look at some of these examples that I was able to gather. November 18th, Israel newspaper Haaretz blames Israeli Defense Forces for massacre. A military helicopter firing at terrorists at the Nova Musical Festival near Kibbutz Re'im harmed Jews, Haaretz claimed in a report that it was based on a police investigation. The report was picked up around the world, boosting Hamas claims that Israeli had actually killed themselves on October 7th. The police quickly refuted the report, saying no indication was given of any harm to civilians caused by an aerial activity at the Nova Musical Festival. November 15th, BBC says sorry twice. The British Broadcasting Company is usually a pretty tough nut to crack when attempting to obtain apologies for even the most ridiculous errors. That's why November 15th was such a historic day. The BBC apologized for its incorrect Israel-related coverage not once, but twice, after actually reporting that medical teams and Arabic speakers were being targeted by the IDF at Gaza's Shifa hospital, the BBC corrected the error and admitted that the actual facts were that IDF forces who entered Shifa included medical teams and Arabic speakers to ease tension. The error fell below our usual editorial standards, according to the presenter. Hours later, a BBC report said that the Washington, D.C. pro-Israel rally was attended by 10,000 people was also changed after it was pointed out that the number was actually more like 290,000. One more. November 6th, NBC says dead LA Jew just hit his head. Paul Kessler, 69 years old, died from blunt force head trauma following a confrontation with a counter-protester amid simultaneous pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the Thousand Oaks in Greater Los Angeles, according to the Ventura County Sheriff's Office. The Ventura County Medical Examiner's Office said Kessler suffered skull fractures and swelling and bruising of the brain and determined his death to be a homicide. But NBC's headline downplayed Kessler's death and made it seem more like self-inflicted, saying Jewish man dies after hitting head in altercation. CNN's initial headline was no better: arrest made in death of Jewish protester who fell and hit his head. There's also mainstream media outlets saying that the war in Gaza is a religious war. No, it's not. More than 28,000 Palestinians have been killed so far, and many more are still under the rubble. However, Israelis don't see on their screens what the rest of the world sees. Rather, they continue to relive through survivors' testimonies and other stories the horrors of October 7th. These kinds of reports are rarely watched now by others. Gaza's destruction and the mass killings of Palestinians, many of them elderly, women, and children, are reported by Israel's mainstream media very selectively as unfortunate but inevitable collateral damage for what Hamas alone should be held accountable. At this point, the Palestinians fighting in Gaza, they're just fighting for their lives in whatever little land they have. Now, just a quick pause from our deep dive today. If you guys are finding value in the discussion and you want to stay updated on the latest analysis and uncover the truths behind the headlines, make sure you hit that like button below. It also helps us out and tells YouTube that you guys are enjoying the content. And while you're at it, why not subscribe? Join our community for more in-depth looks into critical topics. Plus, go ahead and hit the notification bell so you don't worry about missing out on any of our future new videos. All right, so media experts and Arab journalists, they're calling out Western media for a series of professional blunders in their coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict. They're pointing out that often the mainstream media is publishing unsubstantiated claims, telling only one side of the story, and painting Palestinians as nothing more than objects in Hamas's hands. These same experts and journalists, they're saying that the systemic bias in favor of Israel is irreparably damaging the credibility of news agencies considered mainstream in the eyes of Arabs and others. The problem is that Western media organizations dehumanize Palestinians and legitimize Israeli violations of international law as Israel bombs Gaza. A critical piece missing from the conversation is the historical suffering of Palestinians over the last 75 years, a context that could provide deeper understanding. Israeli parties are making sensational claims and Western news agencies, they're picking it up, no questions asked. A recent example was the oft-reporting claim that Hamas beheaded 40 babies. Despite the lack of evidence, the allegations were reported by The Independent, CNN, Fox News, and the New York Post. Even Biden implied he had seen pictures of dismembered babies on October 12th. The White House later walked back his comments, saying Biden had seen no such images and that he had seen news reports. Lena Monzer, a Lebanese writer with experience with Western media, points out that when Western outlets focus on these claims of 40 beheaded babies and women being raped, then what they are effectively doing is justifying the brutality of Israelis' counterattack. It's all media misinformation and disinformation. As explained by Lee McIntyre, a research fellow at Boston University's Center of Philosophy and History of Science, when accounts filled with falsehoods mix with the truth, they pollute the entire information ecosystem, making it harder for everyone to tell fact from fiction. Disinformation is all about spreading lies on purpose. Imagine someone crafting a story that they know isn't true just to mess with people's head or achieve some goal. That's disinformation for you. Misinformation, though, that's more like an honest mistake. So picture this. You hear something, totally believe it's the real deal, and then you share it with your friends only to later find out that it was all bogus. You didn't mean to spread a lie, you thought it was legit. Both can be and often are at play during big moments in history, like during a presidential election or when wars are starting up. Disinformation, though, is the real damaging thing. It doesn't just mess with the facts, it messes with how much we trust each other. It's like sometimes you get this perfectly wrapped conspiracy theory and it just kind of makes you just start questioning everything and everyone. In today's world, where truth and lies exist side by side, it's getting super tough for even the most reliable sources to figure out what's real and what's not. That's why I'm really thankful to have you guys and our truth community here on YouTube. We keep each other real and grounded on the facts that are actually happening in America. And we don't let ourselves get too distracted by mainstream media noise and falsehoods. Am I right, guys? You know, I'm not claiming that we have all the answers about what Israel should be doing next. But what I do know is that if the Israeli Defense Forces start killing civilians without discrimination, they're crossing a line that puts them on the same moral ground as Hamas. And let's be clear, justice for both Israelis and Palestinians isn't going to come from a mindset that only sees one group's lives as valuable. We're not just stuck between choosing Hamas's violent leadership and the extreme factions in Israel. There are amazing people in both Israel and the Palestinian territories, people who are actively trying to bridge divides and heal wounds, even as they face incredible danger. Sadly, some have already lost their lives due to this conflict, and it seems like more loss will be coming in the days to come. For those of us watching from afar, we've got to take a cue from these brave souls by embracing the belief that every life is precious and deserving of dignity. If we do that, we might just find a way out of this vicious cycle of violence that's consuming both Israelis and Palestinians. It's clear that there are grievances on both sides. Israel has significant military power and has been accused of using it to oppress Palestinians, turning Gaza into what some call an open-air prison and expanding settlements into the West Bank. Now, on the flip side, Hamas is known for its extreme anti-Semitic views and has been criticized of endangering Palestinian lives by operating among civilians. But when we only see one side of the story, we're missing the bigger picture. Claiming moral superiority allows each side to ignore the real-world impact of their actions. It's kind of like a moral blind spot that excuses any behavior, no matter how harmful, as long as it serves their cause. As observers, we need to hold on to our humanity. We should see the victims as people, care about their suffering, and look for ways to make things better. If we lose that perspective, we're not just condoning atrocities, we're closing our eyes to the possibility of improving lives. We should feel for Israeli victims without excusing revenge attacks, and we should condemn terrorism by Hamas as well as any wrongful acts by Israel. Criticize both sides when they cause harm, acknowledging the power imbalances, and never lose sight of the fundamental truth that suffering in and of itself is a tragedy. This isn't about saying the right things. It's about finding paths to peace. Picking a side and ignoring their faults leads to a dead end of cheering on the unthinkable. That's not how we're going to help bring about peace. Lately, there's been a growing support for some form of aid conditioning. Back in January, the Senate overwhelmingly rejected a bill from Senator Bernie Sanders that would cut off military aid to Israel if it were found to be committing human rights violations. Maybe they could revisit that one. Another step reported under consideration is to tamp down American defense of Israel at the UN Security Council. The U.S. has traditionally acted as Israel's shield on the council. Of the 89 times it has used its veto as a permanent council member since the UN's founding in 1945, more than half involved Israel. Another idea gaining some momentum is that Biden should sidestep Netanyahu altogether and make his case directly to the Israeli people. Richard Haas, an influential veteran U.S. diplomat and former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, says that a speech over the prime minister's head would clearly show what the U.S. believes and could lead to a real debate in Israel. Now, as we wrap up our video on the complexities of the Israel-Hamas conflict and what the media often gets wrong, it's essential to remember the importance of seeking the truth behind the headlines. The real stories, the ones that truly matter, are about the people caught in the middle of these struggles, their lives, and their hopes for peace. Misinformation and bias can cloud our understanding and our judgment, making it all the more critical to approach this kind of sensitive topic with empathy and a critical mind. Whether it's questioning the narrative presented by mainstream media or even considering the perspectives of those on the ground, we should always do our very best to understand the full picture. Am I right, guys? Now, if you found this conversation helpful, definitely hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video to help spread awareness, and until next time, y'all be safe. Take care.